People are complex. Their context is complex. The situation is complex. You think you understand somebody, and you don't really as a manager. As we design work, as we think about this, let's not oversimplify at first. It's not a simple change to treat an employee like a customer. The system has to be pretty radically rethought.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Picture two cafes that serve precisely the same coffee. The first cafe has friendly baristas, comfortable seating, free Wi-Fi, great music. But the second cafe, the employees are bored. The music's bad and the Wi-Fi is slow. Most of us would obviously choose the first one because our experience of a product goes well beyond the product. It's closely linked to the services that deliver it and surround it, and how companies and customers co-create the value of that service at the center of a spreading interconnected network of services. These are a few of the fundamental insights of service science, which is an approach to service innovation invented by Jim Spohrer and several others at IBM. Today, we're talking to Jim about the insights service science might give us about how to deliver a better experience of work. Jim has a fascinating background. He earned his first degree in physics from MIT and his PhD in computer science, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science from Yale. He spent years working as a distinguished scientist at Apple. He finished his career at IBM as the director of cognitive open tech. That means he was the global spokesperson for Watson. You may remember Watson's the computer famous for besting human champions on the game show Jeopardy. In that role, Jim's job was to partner with businesses on how Watson could help them deliver services better. In this episode, Jim and I talk about how to approach businesses through the lens of service science. He shares examples of how it's being applied today and how it can lead to service innovation. And we explore how the future of artificial intelligence and someday digital twins will play a role in services and our experience of work. If you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you do, please remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does matter. Thanks to you, this last month, Work for Humans peaked at number 48 among all business management podcasts in the United States on Apple Podcasts. So, thank you. And now, my conversation with Jim Spohrer. Jim Spohrer, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you.
I actually don't know how to say it exactly, but you may be the founder of service science. You're one of the founders of service science.
Yeah, I always say Paul Magno and I. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's partially because IBM gave you an interesting puzzle to solve, which was IBM was transforming into service from a more product-centric approach, and the economy was moving towards services from a goods-oriented perspective. And they gave you this problem, which is, how do we grapple with this future?
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into how it affects employees, I want to get into the question of service science so that everybody has that framework. What are some of the insights that are available to businesses that are available through service science as opposed to other approaches?
Yeah. I think the key insight of service science is that we look at people, businesses, universities, nations as service systems. We have this abstraction we call a service system. And when you start looking at all of those things as giving and getting service as their primary function, then that provides an insight that I think is really foundational. And then we see this as an evolving ecology. And I know that jargony, but that's the insight, is when you do start seeing the world as full of these service system entities, then you start thinking about, well, how are the win-win interactions between the service systems? How can they be designed better? How can you design change that's more win-win? A lot of change, people think winners, losers. And I know it's close to your passion about businesses should treat employees more like they treat customers, where they're really trying to design their offerings for their customers. And how do we design jobs that are more engaging to employees. So I think this view that we can design interactions to make them more win-win, we can design change processes to make them more win-win. That's the fundamental thing that we're working with service science, is really focusing on that.
I've grappled with service science for a while. As you know, I've been at least an adjunct member of ISIP, which is the organization that really has advanced this. This is the way it changes my perspective. And let's test and see if this is right, which is that I go into a coffee shop and I'm there for a cup of coffee. And so a goods focused understanding of that transaction is it's all about the coffee. I'm going to get the coffee. And really, we're just focusing on the chain of events that leads from that coffee back through the coffee machine, through the ordering system, and it ends up with coffee in my hand. But when I think of it as a service system, I walk into that coffee shop and I see it quite differently, which is, first of all, it's more than the product, which is the barista knows my name. We talk about her bike sometimes, which is this e-bike, which I think is cool. She smiles at me. There's music. The music happens to be some indie thing that I've never heard before, which I like. There's kind of a buzz of people. There's all these things that are in there. And every single one of those is a part of the service that's beyond the cup of coffee. So there's a breadth to service. Is that accurate?
Yes. The experience is more than just the product. And service blueprinting is the methodology for thinking about that. And a lot of user experience design, do you call them users or do you call them customers? I mean, there's a lot of overlap there. But there's layers, and you move up those layers or down those layers, however you want to think about it, to thinking more and more holistically. And really, that is the way that a service science perspective would lead to innovation. You're not just narrowly focused on how do I improve the taste of the coffee. There is that element of the product and the experience, but far more, as you said, there's the ambiance as you enter, but there's also the notion that you had to go somewhere to get there. So what if the coffee could come to you? Or there's more and more to the system. And what if the coffee was free? Or what if they paid you to drink the coffee? This is where you start getting into innovations, when you can start thinking of the value propositions.
What's an example of a particularly successful service science-led innovation? Or maybe I should say service-led. It doesn't have to be the science, but service-led.
It's a great question to think about innovation, period, but think about service innovation. I love asking people who are relatively new and enthusiastic about service science, so what do you think the greatest service innovation in human history is, or in recent times? And you get a range of answers. I love the answer like when somebody really had thought through credit cards as a key service innovation. And it was an older business person who he actually remembered what life was like before credit cards and what life was like after credit cards. And he also understood that travel was exploding. And so when you were only doing business in a local area, it was one thing. To me, the biggest service innovations in history were things like universal education or democracy, which a lot of people probably don't think of as service innovations, but I think of them as service innovations. Now, when we get into recent times, I think the biggest service innovation was when people started thinking of their phone as more than a phone, as more than a communication device, when they started thinking about their phone as a platform for a wide range of experiences. You know, I have a portion of my garage which is piled with boxes that my wife wants me to throw away. And I say, no, that's my memories of the camcorders and records and books and all of the stuff that I now have on my phone. So I get the service of all those products in this little device, and more and more and more every day. I like to get up early and look at the stars. So it's nice to be able to see the constellations and know what the stars are. Your device can tell you that. So I would say the biggest service innovation in recent times is the smartphone as a platform for a wide range of experiences. That's probably the biggest in my lifetime so far.
You know, I actually have another coffee shop example. I spend a lot of time in coffee shops. I went to Pete's the other day, and somebody with a backhoe had severed the network connection to Santa Cruz, where I live. So, what was left of the Pete's coffee shop?
Mm, yeah.
The cash register stopped working. The music stopped working. The alarm system stopped working. I didn't have the app, but if I'd had the app, my phone had stopped working because that network had actually been cut. And so I say, oh, I'll just go get some cash. And so I go around the corner. The ATM wasn't working because everything that I had to do to interact and the whole experience of Pete's, they just gave me a pound of coffee for free. They said, commerce is over. Here's a pound of coffee. So what's interesting about that is the degree to which information has advanced as a component of the service. I mean, they could still heat up the coffee, and they had a hand, and they could hand me a pound of coffee. That's what they could do. Everything else was over.
Yeah, yeah. So many of our interactions are technology mediated that I say so far the smartphone is probably the biggest interaction change. Because you think of you have good days and bad days. That was a bad day. I mean, that was a bad day for a lot of people because unless they were like looking for an excuse to go hang out at the beautiful beaches of Santa Cruz, in which case it was a great day. But so many of our interactions are technology mediated that we can start thinking about how do we innovate these technology mediated interactions? And we can start thinking about resilience. How do we make them more resilient so they don't fail? That's another important area of innovation. In fact, I was just reading a book that was submitted to our IZIP collections on resilience. And this author goes into all of these issues of our reliance on digital experience and what do we do when it's down and how do we become more resilient. But I said the smartphone was probably the biggest service innovation that I've experienced so far in my life. Certainly technology mediated, it's the biggest service innovation. I think there's some others that fall in other realms, but in terms of technology mediated service interaction, service experience, the smartphone is the biggest for sure. It's kind of like clothing, right? People are never very far from an arm's reach away. But there's more coming. And I think that's where those of us in the service science community, those of us in the IZIP community, we're thinking about, okay, now what happens when we insert artificial intelligence in those technology-mediated interactions? How do we give and get better service when we have artificial intelligence capability? And that's really where my recent book, Service in the AI Era comes in, is on that topic.
Let's talk about that. How do you see services evolving in the AI era?
Well, there's two things that we really have to keep in mind. AI is very, very hard. And so when we talk about AI, some people immediately go to the science fiction AI that we don't have yet, but maybe in a few decades we'll have something like that, maybe 5 or 6 decades, who knows? I'm not very optimistic. I think AI is really very, very hard. So I think, we get there, but it's decades away for full artificial intelligence. So we have to look at what do we have now. We have certain AI capabilities that are improving our experience in writing, for example. I love the Microsoft editor. I love that Gmail completes my sentences for me. There's a lot of AI that's being infused around the edges. I'm playing now with DALL-E. I was one of the 1 million people, I guess, that got access to DALL-E, so I'm playing with that. And OpenAI and Hugging Face also have some open source ones as well. In fact, there's a growing list of AI capabilities that we can start playing with to augment our capabilities. So I think the short answer to your question, Dart, is we have to upskill to use these AI tools today. That's the main thing, is we should be learning all of these. If anybody wants, I'm keeping a list. Terry Griffith, who's the president of IZIP, she has a personal productivity blog space that she's keeping track of a lot of these tools. So in the short term, we have to upskill with AI and start using these capabilities and experimenting with them. In the long term, and we write about this in the book, Service in the AI Era, in the long term, it really becomes interesting because there's a digital twin of us. And for folks who don't know what a digital twin is, most of the stuff in digital twins has been about, a digital twin of a heavy equipment so you can predict maintenance, a big tractor or truck or something like that, or a turbine and a jet. That's fourth industrial revolution digital twins. But imagine a digital twin of you, because that's coming. And when we all have a digital twin, we can get and give certain services. There's standard emails we reply to from people. I get lots of emails about service science, for example. I get lots of emails about IZIP, and I have standard responses. So my digital twin can take care of a lot of these service interactions, even while I'm sleeping. So the give and get of service is starting to really change as we get into the AI era where we have digital twins of ourselves. So again, short term, we start playing with upskilling with these little AI tools. Long term, we have a digital twin of ourselves. And that's really when I think this view of service science, seeing the world in terms of entities that give and get service, could help us understand the innovation possibilities that happen in the road ahead.
There's like three directions I want to go with that. One of them is, I have an experience with this recently, which is that I'm a contributor to a journal on Substack, which is called the Flux Review. And our last issue was entirely supported by large language model type AIs. And it was interesting, right? It was very interesting to see how that worked. Basically, what the argument of the thing was is that they're not really assistants, but they are muses yet right now, which is that right now I can use them to generate ideas that I alone wouldn't.
That's right. I loved what you said about the muses. It was just, I don't know if it was you or the team, but it was hilarious.
No, it's the team.
It was like, you can ignore them. They can be stupid. They can make terrible mistakes. And you're amused by your muse giving you advice that's so horribly wrong. And I just thought it was a wonderful perspective. So congratulations. That was really nice.
It was fun. And that's the important part I want to get to, right? Which is, if I'm somebody, I'm going to say I'm an employee in a service system. And the way I frame that is that I'm exchanging value with lots of people. That's what I do as an employer, as a worker of any kind. I'm exchanging value. Is AI going to make my experience better or not? And the reason I ask this is that frequently when we talk about AI, we think about displacing the workforce. We're afraid of that. But the truth is, in a partnership with AI, am I going to enjoy my job more or less? I think I'm going to enjoy it more. I don't know if you have thought about that.
Yeah, I have. There's a wonderful BBC article, I can send it to you, where they looked at digital twins of people. I think they found one scholar who was pretty confident that we would all have digital twins by this time in the next decade, roughly 2032. And the big issue that they were looking at is, how ethical is it for your company to support building a digital twin of you if your company is just going to use the digital twin of you instead of you and lay you off? So that was a big ethical issue that relates to the employee-employer relationship. And then there was another perspective in the article, which I thought was quite interesting, about how, if you look at people, right, we like to be in flow. I missed an interesting call on digital twins yesterday. I had to apologize to the person. I said, I missed your talk because I was in flow writing, and I just totally lost track of time. So in some sense, putting my employer hat on, because I was a manager at IBM, executive at IBM for years, and I had a lot of people, and I love the idea that we could together be so excited about work that we would get into this flow state together. And for folks who don't know flow, it's basically this idea that, when we do things, we can be bored if it's routine, and we can have anxiety if it's too challenging. But there's this kind of zone you can get in where your practice, you're good at it, and you're slightly challenging yourself. So you're in this wonderful zone of, you feel this is new and it's not scary, and I'm getting better and better and better at what I'm doing because I'm in this flow state. It's a very human thing, I think. we find these things that we really enjoy, kind of like the good days of service experience where every interaction we have feels great. And then we have the bad days where every interaction feels bad. But this notion of employee engagement where you're in flow, how will a digital twin, an AI digital twin, help us get into that state? Because the digital twin, in some ways, can take over the routine stuff. So if it gets too boring, you know, as we co-evolve with our digital twin, it could be more and more of the time we can find our way into these flow states. So that's a positive thought. And I think the idea of customer and employee, which I know you put those concepts in contrast and see a revolution coming in business where the business model of business will be changed so that we start treating employees more like customers. I agree that day is coming. I think, though, the major innovation that's required isn't so much a revolution as it is an incremental change in the value propositions. And I think it's an incremental change because when a business can really much better measure and remember the contributions, the real contributions that people make to their business, there should be ways to compensate people for that. Imagine the family of Newton. Every time somebody puts on the brake in their car, the family of Newton gets a little richer because of F equals ma. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't think it'll ever be that extreme. That's pretty far-fetched. But the idea that when your digital twin is being executed inside this company, I know Adam Chire even created a patent for this, where there's ways of compensating people. And when a customer uses a product in a particularly innovative way, oftentimes they put it on YouTube these days and become influencers and gain revenue that way. So I think there's ways we can start innovating the value proposition where the difference between an engaged customer and an engaged employee kind of vanishes. It's more the design of that user experience. So they're excited about using your platform or using your product or service, however you want to frame it. There's that interaction and that experience that's being shared. And that's how markets get created. It's that social learning. Somebody says, oh my gosh, I really like something about you that you've done, that you've had an experience, and I want to have that same experience. So I do think it's going to get very, very interesting in a few decades when we do have these digital twins of ourselves. And interesting in quotes, I can see the bad side. I can see a lot of unintended consequences that happen as a result of this. But this is the essence of service science, Dart. We're working on win-win. We're really trying to understand win-win, and even conflict can be turned into greater understanding. This is the challenge that we're on, is we're seeking to innovate win-win and in interactions and change processes. And I think I'll just end with, I know I've been going on a while, but Robert Wright's book, Non-Zero, The Logic of Human Destiny. A lot of people don't like to read books these days, but if I could urge you to, and it never mentions service science, by the way. It's a very nice book on the concepts. All the concepts in service science are there, even though he doesn't use the term. It was very influential in thinking about non-zero win-win games, and that's the logic of human destiny. And the whole of evolution, social evolution, has been getting better and better at playing win-win games, like universal education, like democracy. And those aren't the end. Universal education exists in a world where we don't have digital twins of people. Democracy exists in a world where we don't have some other innovation. So as we start thinking about the possibilities, that's where I get really excited, is thinking about how the fundamental is service systems. I can't imagine any future that doesn't have service systems interacting, hopefully in better and better win-win ways, changing in better and better win-win ways, getting the interactions and change processes to be more win-win. Enormous opportunities for innovation.
Let's talk about win-win for a second. Besides traditional ways of thinking anchoring too much on goods, It seems to me that traditional ways of thinking anchor too much on, I'm not going to say competition now. I'm just going to say win for me, and I don't really care for you, right? It doesn't even have to be win-lose. It's just I'm not trying for a win-win here, right? And in fact, I think this is one of the reasons why the employee-employer relationship is fraught. It's fraught because in many cases it becomes both sides seeing it as a win-lose because they're contesting for goods that can't be shared. Money's one of them, which is I give you $1, I don't have the dollar anymore. You give me $1, you don't have the dollar anymore. But there's this whole range of service that's a part of employment, which doesn't actually have to be in the win-lose dynamic. For instance, if I give you good puzzles to solve, which if I look at your career, you have probably been given more good puzzles to solve than anyone I've ever known, right?
I've been very lucky.
Well, and not just your average problems either. The biggest, hairiest problems around, many of them have been given to you. I guess my question is, do you see companies anchoring too much on a win-lose or a win I don't care? And is that still an active thing in the world?
Well, to me, the hard part there is companies have a lot of people. I mean, big companies like IBM, like I've worked for, like Google, like where you work. I mean, Apple, where, I worked. I mean, Exxon, my AI startup company in the 70s was acquired by Exxon. So when I think of companies, I think of these big companies. And I think of people come in, people go out. And if the people that came in had capability X and the people that go out have capabilities X plus delta, that company is serving a social purpose. And there's managers in that company. So to me, it's like when people say China, I don't think of China. I think of all of yes, there is the China service system, but the government and so forth at the highest level of abstraction. But it's people, and people are at different skill levels. You got me thinking this morning, because of some notes you left yesterday, and I was thinking about what were the really worst experiences I had as an employee. And now that I'm retired, I was trying to think, what's the worst experience I've had when I've retired? So I was trying to think of these worst experiences. And the experiences are mostly because of inexperienced managers. They're not the company had a policy that was persecuting me or making my life miserable. It's this manager wasn't a good manager at that particular context moment. And a lot of first-time managers, they became a manager because they were so good at what they did as a technical person. And so they expect everybody to live up to their standards, and they become a horrible manager. In fact, if you read Nick D'Onofrio's new autobiography, he talks about service science and T-shaped people. And he talks about when he became a manager, and he was a horrible manager. I mean, everybody was like, didn't want to work for him when he was first manager. This guy rose to senior vice president of innovation, second in command at IBM, considered for CEO of IBM. He was one of my mentors. He went from a terrible manager, and he wrote about it in his autobiography about how bad he was and how he changed and how his logic and thinking changed. So when you talk about a company, Dart, I have a really hard time with that because most of the experience that employees have are because of their direct manager. And their direct managers have varying degrees of competence and skill at management. And I remember myself when I made the deal with the devil. I remember our vice president at Apple, the first time I became a manager, he says, look, I know you want to hire somebody in your team. If you become the manager, I'll let you hire 5 people. And it was like, oh my gosh, I can hire one person or I can hire 5 people. I think I'll become a manager. And that's how I got sucked into this management thing. And I was a horrible manager when I first became a manager because I did exactly what every good technical person does. I made the life of my technical people horrible because I expected them to live up to my standards, which were way too high. So I started reading The 1 Minute Manager. That's how I do everything in life is I get bad at it, and I fail, and then I start reading. What can I read? What can I read? Because I'm a read learner. And I just read 1 Minute Manager. I read Servant Leadership. Oh my gosh, Servant Leadership. This is how I wish I had been managed. When I had those horrible managers, if they had been servant managers, I would have been okay. So I adopted that. And I think I became a pretty good manager. I mean, nobody's perfect, but yeah.
I totally agree with that. So back to my coffee shop example. I was talking to the chief people officer at Starbucks once who said, where should we invest in our coffee shops in terms of talent? I mean, should we invest in leadership? And they decided to invest in baristas. Why? Because that's the customer contacting role. Well, when a company sees employees as a customer, managers are customer facing. And so the quality, the ability of a manager to be the barista, right? To be that customer facing role. And what I would ask you is if you had applied a service science lens to yourself as a manager, would it have made you a better manager?
Yes, I think so, because I think when I look at service leadership or service management, it's that give and get of service. You realize we're service system entities, we're responsible actors, we're learning to invest in becoming better future versions of ourselves. And so when I look at myself as an early manager, seeing my mistakes and then taking action, not just like, oh, darn it, I screwed up. I think that person's going to quit because I did such a horrible job right there. You try to improve, and it takes experience. You can only read so much and learn so much from reading. You have to get out there and practice and fail and get better and succeed and get better. So I don't know that that's anything special other than we're thinking about win-win interactions. We're thinking about win-win change. And how do we design an experience so that it feels more win-win for the manager and the employee? How do we design an experience when every manager's had this experience where something's coming down from the top that you know your employees are going to hate? And it's your job to explain why this is necessary for the business. Probably the worst thing is a layoff, a staff reduction. No manager ever forgets the first time they've ever had to do a staff reduction. Lucky managers never have to do it.
Changed my soul having to lay off my team.
Yeah. I was at Apple. There was a staff reduction. We got hit. Fortunately, I had one, fortunately, because other groups were hit like bigger, I had one person to lay off. So I looked at my team and I said, this person right here is least happy in his job role, and therefore his performance is the lowest. And I said, but how the hell am I going to lay this guy off? I don't want to do this. The only way I can, in good conscience, lay this person off is if I can find them another job. So I started searching, and I found like 3 jobs that I thought this guy would be really, really qualified for at other companies. And I even knew some of the managers, so I was able to call and say, hey, I've got this guy. And I didn't say anything about the layoff or anything like that, but I said, he's really interested in this and this, and I don't have that here. I'm wondering if I could get him maybe to come over and talk to you sometime. And obviously, I've been in layoffs later than that where I didn't go to that extreme, but that was the only way I could feel good at all about the fact that I had to lay somebody off. And that, to me, that's a service sciencey thing where we're trying to create a win-win. We know this is a good person. We know they have technical strengths, but they're not in the right context. And the corporation can't afford them at the moment. So what do you do? And you could imagine a system, a service innovation where that would happen. I'll tell you, the most beautiful thing I ever saw at IBM, and this was during Sam Palmisano's period, and IBM was growing. I was in the venture capital group. I had just moved from Apple to IBM. I was CTO of the venture capital group, and I was watching this Silicon Valley explode with startups. And I was watching IBM. We came up with an algorithm to help identify companies that we want to partner with at IBM, eventually acquire. If you go out to Wikipedia, there's IBM M&A, and we were acquiring $100 million company, sometimes more than 100 million, very, very rarely less than 100 million. We were acquiring $100 million company per month. We're adding 1.2 billion to IBM's revenue each year just through acquisitions. That was an exciting time. But I remember Sam Palmisano, to his credit, our CEO at the time, he said to the existing parts of IBM, he says, guess what? I want you to think about a 10% staff reduction every year. At first, people said, what? And he says, well, you're a smart manager. You know how to use technology to improve your productivity. So you should be able to do your job better each year with 10% less staff. Am I wrong somewhere here? Because that's what we're promising our customers, right? We're going to use technology to help you be more productive. So if it's good for our customers, it's got to be good for us. But what he did was brilliant. He would acquire these companies. We were acquiring one a month. And then he would scale them up rather than lay the IBMer off during the great times of the 2000s when we were growing. He would move them into these startups to scale up their capability. So you got to think, I thought about this a lot. It made a big impression on me because this was when we were creating Service Science. And I said, wow, what a win-win. These acquired companies are going to see their revenue and their impact in the world just go up quickly because of IBM. And these IBMers who are in other parts of our business and know IBM are going to be able to move in and help that scaling happen. And our customers are going to love it. It's win, 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 win. And we in the venture capital group loved it because, we were providing an exit strategy and the VCs were sending us more and more of their great companies to look at. So there's an example of something that IBM was able to do because it was so big. But think about the world. Think of the top 1,000 companies in the world, the Forbes list. There's an innovation to make this movement of people into better contexts happen. I know you know David Norford. Well, in the I4J, we were just together a couple weeks ago.
What is I4J?
Innovation for Jobs, Vint Cerf, David Norford. I'll stop there, but my point is, when you get into service science, when you get into this win-win logic, which you don't have to call service science if you don't want to, you can call it mechanism design, you can call it social learning theory, you can call it actor network theory if you're a fan of Bruno Latour. I don't care what you call it. The point is, we can innovate if we view the world in terms of systems that are giving and getting service that have to change their interactions. If we make the focus on win-win, win-win-win-win-win, like during that Sam Palmisano period at IBM, amazing things can happen for so many people.
I'm so interested in that. I'll tell you where a lot of that win-win comes from, I think, in the future. It's exactly what you were describing when you talked about the person that you had to lay off, which is being able to match people with what they love as opposed to what they can do. And it has to be both. It has to be something they can do and that they love. But today, the whole system is optimized around matching people with what they can do, not with what they love. And it's partially because what we love is largely hidden. It's not in any information system. It's sometimes hard to articulate. What I have found is that one of the big missing pieces in businesses that we allocate work without consciousness of what people want to do in a lot of cases. So if there's 2 people on my team and I just allocate them work at random, then I'm sub-optimizing the system. It's less of a win-win. But if I can match it to what they really love, it's way better. Imagine that across the entire service system, the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think about my teams that I've managed, and I would say to them, my first meeting, what I'm going to try to do is maximize the dot product of value to, at the time, let's say IBM, and value to you. And in order for me to do that, we have to have a career plan for you. And I remember I've been in groups where the person said, Jim, I'm in the perfect job for me. I never want it to change. In a way, that was pretty easy, right? Because they're happy doing what they're doing as long as we're happy and the role isn't going to change. That's like a no-op almost. It's just like monitor everything to make sure you can keep stability for this individual. And then you get people who are like me. And it's like, well, Jim, I get bored pretty easily. I can see myself doing this maybe for another 3 to 6 months, and then it's going to be like really boring if I don't have a bigger challenge. And I want to be CEO someday. So what do I have to do to get promoted? Like next week. And I love people like that, unrealistic about how fast people get promoted, but I love that. Give me a really hard problem and let me at it. And so you get these managers at different skill levels, you get these employees with different ambition levels, and it's wonderful. It's like, what meal will I make today with all these ingredients, all these wonderful ingredients? Because coming down from the top is all these initiatives. I need somebody for this. I need somebody. Do you have anybody that'll volunteer? Because a lot of big companies is like matrices. It's not just you do your job. It's like there are 1,000 opportunities. I'll just grab one out of the air. Employee charitable giving. Who's going to be our employee charitable giving lead for this year? That's an extra bonus duty, and these super ambitious people, I say, okay, why do you want to be this person? Because you are going to be networked into all of the employee giving people. You're going to have visibility at the next executive level. This executive who knows nothing about you, you're going to have a chance to be in a room with that person. So you start thinking about the person who doesn't want their job to change because they're perfect for it. They're happy, everything's good, stability. And you get these people that give me my promotion next week. Super ambitious, super capable. You love them both. And there's a 1,000 in between. So coming back to your question, which to me is like, how do we use service science to improve this? I think before we improve anything, we just have to understand its systems complexity, its experiences at the micro level, its systems. And the more we can just stew in this more holistic way of looking at things, the more we can start to see these opportunities and the more we can start to envision, like the I4J, Innovation for Jobs vision, there's a $1 trillion opportunity in here for the company that figures out this talent movement thing, this worker engagement thing. I think the hardest thing for me as a manager was when people either had a death in the family, especially if it was a parent. People change when their parents die. They shift their goals. The super ambitious person, give me more, is suddenly like, I'm too busy. I really need time to think because my mother's sick.
A friend of mine said something wise, which is that when a parent dies, expect to be crazy for a year. And expect when it happens to somebody else, expect them to be crazy for a year. They're not going to be themselves, which I have found to be totally accurate.
I bring up this example because people are complex. Their context is complex. The situation is complex. You think you understand somebody and you don't really as a manager. And so as we design work, as we think about this, let's not oversimplify at first. A lot of innovations are beautiful because they do oversimplify in a useful way and the vector changes, which is good. But at the beginning, we have to really look at this in its full complexity and understand as holistically as we can. We have to look at it in its full complexity and say, maybe what it's going to look like in the AI era when we have the digital twins is like every job is going to be like a whole collection of people. It's not going to be one person because that's too much responsibility to put on one person's plate. They may have a life event change where they can't perform the way you had predicted they would perform. So let's understand the system has to be pretty radically rethought. It's not a simple change to treat an employee like a customer. I mean, it's simple at one level. Servant leadership, servant management. Teach every manager, give them more instruction, more training so that they get to become a servant manager faster. That would help treat employees like customers.
That's the trick with servant management, I think, is that it's sort of like saying, be good. Because every person, that's a different thing. It's a sophisticated thing to be, I think, a servant leader. And actually, I want to point out something about the death in the family point that you raised. You know that I've been asking hundreds of people this question, what job do you hire your job to do for you? I'll ask you that question in a minute. But one of the things that people say is, I hire my job to pay my debts. And the first person who ever told me that, I thought that they meant school loans. That's not what they meant. Their parents and their grandparents had worked hard to put them through college so that they could get a good job. and so that they could have a good life. And so something about what they were doing at work was performative, which was, I need to show my parents and my grandmother who worked weekends that I'm paying them back for that. And so when there's a death of a parent like that, it can change your whole motivation and your whole reward system for work.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the complexity of each individual.
And then you've got me thinking about this digital twin concept, which I have really never spent any time thinking about before. I imagine a situation where I could see a balance beam. And as I did my work, I'd see how much of my work was actually being allocated to my digital twin and how much of my job was being allocated to me as me. And so one of the things that would happen is I would find that the part being allocated to me is the most novel problems, which is my digital twin's great at the routine stuff it's learning from me. It's not as good at novel and solving novel problems. Sweet, right? At least for somebody maybe like me and like you, which is all I really want to do is novel problems. But then you said something else, which is this idea that there's a group of people working on something and there might be this digital twin of the group,
Yes.
which is there's this group consciousness, which can be shared and could be an entity that became, I don't know what exactly, a digital team twin? I don't know. Could be very, very powerful. And then when one person leaves, at least there's some support for what they did.
That's right. Yeah. It's going to get very interesting in a few decades when we have these digital twins of us. And of course, it'll be incremental over time. But that's the thing I'm spending a lot of energy. Actually, I got a talk at UC Santa Cruz, Silicon Valley on that on August 25th, this concept of how digital twins are going to change education and universities in particular. But yeah, that's the big change that's coming. It'll take a while. AI is not advanced enough to really do that currently, but it's definitely getting there. And I think the motivation of people is a big, big issue. How we, how the value propositions distribute rewards, and I guess blame. If you're going to do rewards, you might as well do blames, rights and responsibilities. That's a key service science concept is, we look at the world in terms of service systems, but service systems are reconfiguring four types of resources. And the four types of resources you can think of just simply as people, organizations. Why people and organizations? Well, they have rights. A company is a virtual person, so they have rights and responsibilities. Then you have a cup, any physical thing in nature. And because of our legal system, they don't have rights. And information doesn't have rights. We can connect that information and things like your driveway and your car. We can connect the rights and responsibilities through the entities that have rights and responsibilities. But dynamically reconfiguring these resources into new value propositions, this is where we have to start thinking about win-win. And the interesting thing is that in service science, we have this I-SPAR model of interactions, service interactions, non-service interactions. Do the service interactions realize the value that was part of the value proposition, or do they not? If it doesn't, was it illegal? Is there justice for the parties involved? I mean, the I-SPAR model is kind of like that win-win, lose-lose kind of thing, but it's further elaborated. So we think about it in a bigger context, but that's the design space, and we have to think about learning, because if there's no failure, learning slows down. If we could find a way to learn without failure, I guess that's what simulations are about, is to try to learn without having a real failure. We can have a simulated failure. But that's where I think, I often get the question, you didn't ask it, but let me ask it myself, is what's the biggest weakness in service science right now? And it's that we don't have this tool. It's a bunch of ideas and concepts. We borrow tools from other things, but we do not have the tool for simulating the ecology of service systems. Once we get digital twins, we're going to be one step closer. And once we have complexity economics, like they're doing at Santa Fe Institute, we'll be able to simulate possible policies and changes and new value propositions, try them on in a simulation to see if we like them, and then make them real. When we get to that tool, the acceleration that will come in win-win-win-wins will be enormous. And, economists think about this win-win stuff. Caldor Hicks. What if the winners make enough that they can compensate the losers? That's, Caldor Hicks economics. So there's all of these things we can see right on the horizon. But to your last point, please give some thought to digital twins of employees and managers, because it's in that manager-employee relationship, Dart, that I think your transformation revolution that you're working on happens when we have better digital twins of all of the possible contexts for all of these possible employee-manager relationships. And then how do we turn that into a win-win? It's not a simple thing. It's a very complex thing.
First of all, I love that you're working on a methodology where you can see essentially there are capabilities in the future that we're going to be able to bring on board. That, in other words, you're so forward-looking that you've got this set of capabilities that are future state that are built into the possibilities for the methodology. It's really exciting. So I'm going to ask you what I ask at the end of every interview is, what job do you hire your job to do for you? And I know you're retired, so I can talk about your preceding jobs. What job do you hire your job to do for you?
I've always asked, what's the biggest problem the business is facing? And I thought about it. I don't just ask that question and not have an answer already in my head. And sometimes what I hear from the executives and what I think is the most urgent problem are the same. And then it's easy. Let me solve it. Give me a chance to go in and do it. Sometimes it's different. And oh boy, those are even more challenging. My last job was like that, where I said, what's the biggest problem IBM is facing in the AI area? And the executive said, oh, it's working with universities. We've got to do more work with universities. And I said, well, I've been doing that. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is all this open source stuff that we're not even paying attention to. Oh, Jim, we're so far ahead with Watson. We've got the proprietary stuff that's better than the open source. And I said, let me draw these curves for you. And I started drawing these curves of the rate of improvement in the open source AI. And finally, one day, they said, Spohrer's right. We got to take this open source seriously. And, 1 year later, we acquire Red Hat, and I get to lead the open source AI stuff as my final job. But I think my priorities are always, I want something where I'm going to be challenged in learning, and I want it to be something where I'm moving towards financial independence for myself and my family. So I'm always like, whoa, that one pays a lot more, or that one would get me closer to the financial independence quicker. This one I would learn more. This one I might be helping the business more. So that was the opportunity space that I was always juggling is I want to be learning, and I want to be getting to the point where I don't have to work for an employer if I so choose not to. And I can see how the system could be set up. I'll just plug one of my favorite innovations in the minute or so that we have left here, Dart. I see the world now, not only in terms of service systems, but I see a lot of poverty trap for people. And the biggest poverty trap is the fact that a lot of people don't understand that you have to invest to create financial independence. And it's surprising how many people don't realize that. You've got to get a load of money in index funds, is one way to think about it, a simplistic way. But right now, if you work for a big company, they have 401ks. You can put your stuff in a 401k. But what if you don't work for a big company? You're buying things. Maybe you're buying beer and cigarettes. I don't know. But every time you buy beer and cigarettes, if 1% went into a retirement fund, that would break that poverty trap of people are buying things, but they're not saving towards their retirement. So again, that's a service innovation. We could redesign society. It's so easy to implement too, especially with central bank digital currencies coming. That's a future thing. But, even credit cards today, there's the credit card 1% goes to save the planet, right? Why can't 1% go to individual retirement fund? My point being that for me, learning, being challenged, moving towards financial independence, there's systemic things that we can do that would help a lot more people achieve that. And just to take the learning one step further, imagine your smartphone, you're looking, let's say we get the buy to invest going. So you're, I don't know, a construction worker, it doesn't matter, whatever. And you're not saving, but you are now because of buy to invest. So one day you look at your phone and you realize, I just made more for my investments today than I did going to work. And that's a learning moment. And then your phone might coach you and say, well, with these skills, you would have earned twice as much today rather than the skills that you applied. So maybe there's some stuff you want to learn, and maybe there's new jobs that you want so that you're accumulating your wealth faster. So I think that's one way of looking at it. That's one way of slicing the pie is I not only want to think about myself learning and reaching financial independence. But I think with service science, I'm trying to think about, well, how do we redesign this whole system so that there's much more win-win? People can reach retirement age earlier and earlier. Wouldn't that be a great way to compare countries? People in this country reach retirement age, have the ability, financial independence at age 40. Life extension is going on, but the point at which you have the wealth that you could live comfortably for you and your family without additional sources of income other than your investments. I mean, that would be an interesting measure. And I expect with the digital twin world that we're going to enter, we'll see that happening. We'll see the retirement age dropping. We'll see the wealth of individuals increasing. And we'll probably see, as a result of this, the family farm comes back into favor as a mode of living, because throughout most of human history, we've been able to do a lot more with family. And I suspect that's going to be coming back. We'll see.
I'm going to double up this one question, which is that you've just retired. And as a product or as a service, how is retirement compared to job? And does it do for you what you want? Because they're competing products.
Yeah, they are. The biggest thing I've learned in retirement, Dart, is, I had my 2-year plan, everything I'm going to get done in 2 years as soon as I retire, mostly family projects. And within 3 months, I realized it's not about speed. It is about inclusiveness. It's like doing things where the family is all on the same page and moving together, getting it done. It's not about me optimizing and getting things done quickly. That was probably my first biggest lesson in retirement is take my to-do list and reconceptualize it as a we-do list. And that's been great. I've gotten so much more positive family experiences as a result of that learning. The other thing is I still feel I'm very busy. I like to get up early, as you do, I know. I take a walk when I can still see the stars every morning and think about things, and take a nice long walk and think about the world, think about me, think about what I want to do that day. So I get a lot of me time every day before my family is awake. And in that me time, a lot of that, I'm really reading a lot, writing up what I read and sharing it with others that I think it'll benefit. And through iZip, which is the nonprofit that I'm still part of, I really try to nudge the next generation. I'm trying to spend more time. Not that I'm trying to spend less time with the gray hairs like us. I'm just trying to spend more time with people who are early in their career and listen to them and try to be a nudger in the right direction. And I'm finding that really rewarding. So, yeah, I guess it's great to be retired. And, 66, I'm almost 67. So I'm getting up there. And I just feel like you said, I've had just an amazing life. I've just had so much fun working on challenges. And I'm really, really lucky that way.
And you've been able to take a lot of those challenges with you. I mean, I think the work in ISIP and a lot of the work that you're doing in terms of bringing people together who are innovators, like, for instance, the talk that you just hosted with.
Yeah, Rodrigo Ribeiro from Brazil, tacit knowledge and mapping expertise. Fun. Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you very much for talking today. I could just keep talking for another hour, but
Thank you, Dart, and thank you for the flex pointer. Thank you for this great vision of treating employees like customers, so needed. And I guess if I've got a last word before we run, Martin Fleming's new book is coming out, and he talks about work engagement. He was a chief economist at IBM, so somebody else you might want to talk to there. And thanks again, Dart, for staying in touch and being a good colleague. I really appreciate all the stimulating. We don't have them very frequently, but when we do, they're great. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. We've been pretty busy. We don't get to talk nearly often enough. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.